Welcome to Food Psych, a podcast about intuitive eating, body positivity, and health at every size. I'm your host, Christy Harrison, and I'm a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and certified intuitive eating counselor specializing in weight-inclusive wellness. Join me as I talk with interesting people from all walks of life about their relationships with food.
I remember I was teething, little gums bleeding, cried every evening, it was all about eating. When I became a teen, it was all about beef, and now I'm ready for the world. Try and sink my teeth in, stacking it.
Hey, welcome to episode 78. I am really having a hard time with this intro. I've recorded and re-recorded it 5 times. And I'm recording it on Wednesday, November 9th. We all know what happened today. I'm really sad about it, and I have been through so many emotions today. Right now, I'm feeling kind of numb, kind of emotionally hungover from all the feelings. And I was just on retreat with the folks from Be Nourished, Dana Sturdivant, who was my guest a couple weeks ago on Food Psych, and Hillary Knavy. They're such wonderful people, dietitians and therapists in this body positive, health at every size space. And the retreat was for providers who do this work on how to become more embodied for ourselves and how to teach our clients to become more embodied. And this concept of embodiment is being rooted in your body, being at home in your body, feeling okay in your body, and trusting your body. Their concept of body trust is really central to this work. And the retreat was wonderful. And we had 2 days of just a great retreat before all this election shit hit the fan. And then the third day, today, we just cried and talked about our feelings and talked about all the different ways that this election affects us. And there are about 12 of us in the room, amazing people in this body positive space, my colleagues, leaders in the field. And I was just really struck by how we all experienced the range of emotions together, and we held space for each other to experience this range of emotions. And everything was okay. Everything was welcome. Our anger, our sadness, our bewilderment, our trauma responses. And we showed up. We were there, And I think that is such a good symbol of what this is going to take, what it's going to take for those of us who are in pain to heal from this. We have to hold space for feelings. There's space for your fear and your pain and your disillusionment and your anger. There's space for all of it, and we can hold it with compassion. And I know that the desire for dieting or using eating disorder behaviors or taking things out on your body will be strong right now. You'll feel the urge to leave this pain by turning towards those things because they have given you comfort in the past. And I ask that you just acknowledge that and have compassion for that and try to give yourself the care that you need. And maybe that means keeping yourself from engaging in those behaviors and sitting with some pain and getting help, talking to a therapist, talking to your friends, your loved ones, making connections and reaching out to deal with what's underneath. Especially for people who have experienced trauma in our lives. And today's episode, I wanted to share this week because it's about trauma. It's about healing from trauma and helpful ways to be in your body and give yourself compassion and respect while you process trauma. So my guest is Lauren Ezell Minear. She is a therapist and a yoga teacher, yoga therapist, who works with people healing from eating disorders, healing from dieting and body shame. She has a health at every size approach, and she's a wonderful person. And I wanted to, I have all these episodes backlogged, and this was scheduled for later, but I fast tracked it because it's just so apropos right now. And I share something really personal in the episode that I've never shared publicly before. I've shared with people individually a lot, but never you all on this large scale. So this is kind of a special episode for me. And yeah, I'm not going to make any announcements or drive you towards any, ways to support the podcast today. The most important thing this week and right now for the foreseeable future, I think, is self-care. So care for yourself. Take a nice bath or shower, cook yourself a nice meal, or eat just whatever you got to eat to get it done. So maybe you don't have the wherewithal or the energy to cook anything or prepare anything. Just do what you can. Do what you got to do. Nourish your body. Get some sleep. Call a friend. Reach out. Make connections. Cry. Feel it all. Just do it in the context of self-care, self-compassion. You deserve compassion for what you feel. So without any further ado, let's talk to Lauren Minear. I spoke with her via Skype from her home in New York City. So tell me about your relationship with food growing up.
Sure. What can I tell you? I feel like my relationship with food was very neutral during elementary school, and I was always an athlete. I did a lot of movement. And I vividly remember my lunch at the school cafeteria in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade being pizza and fries and lemonade, and that being really exciting to me and looking forward to the pizza days. And then there was definitely a shift for me, I think, as I started. I was also very long and lanky, I think. So I never experienced much in the way of negative feedback around my body when I was that age. But when I started to go through puberty, I definitely noticed a change. I noticed some weight gain that seemed, I remember being very upset about it. And that in my world felt like it was unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that I have specific memories to back that up. I just think that I grew up in the South, and definitely the narrative around women's bodies was that you want to be small. And I remember from a very early age feeling, I have a very strong personality. I was always very good at school. I am very outspoken. And I remember way before food was even a part of this conversation, feeling like I had to choose between sort of my competence and my power and my femininity. And one story that I always tell is in 5th grade, doing some sort of game in life skills class. I don't know if you...
Oh, yeah. It was it taught you how to sew, how to balance a checkbook. It was just a bunch of random.
Yeah. And for some reason, this was more like a group therapy moment. A reason where we had to go around. I went to a co-ed elementary school. We had to go around the room and write a positive thing about everybody. So everybody had a sheet, and then every student wrote a positive thing on each person's sheet. And I remember the cutest boy in school, I sort of knew his handwriting, and I was very excited to see what he wrote. And he wrote genius.
Mm.
And I was devastated.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I think for me, very early on, the messaging was just you're too much to be loved, right? That you really had to be either feminine and small and accommodating and likable, or confident and smart and competitive.
Mm. So seeing genius made you feel like you were the latter.
Right. That I was competition, not an object of desire. And I could go into where I think that comes from.
Yeah.
Besides patriarchy.
Seriously. Yeah. I've talked with, not so much on the podcast, but a number of clients who've been from the South, and some food writer friends of mine as well who've spent time in the South, and really been struck by how like culturally valued thinness is and how much femininity is wrapped up in thinness and smallness. And I don't know, I think it's an interesting sort of aspect of your geography that you are in this.
Like being demure is the ultimate.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I was just like in my own experience, it's funny hearing genius, fifth grade. I'm thinking back to my fifth grade self growing up in liberal Oakland, California, or, suburb of it. And at that point, and I would have been so excited. I would have been like, yes, he likes me, because that to me was like the be all end all in a way.
Yeah. And that really wasn't, it breaks my heart to even recount the story. Very tender memory, because I look back now on myself as a child and think about wanting to be a mother and experiencing little girls around me. And if one of them felt that way, it would be really, really painful for me to see. So I definitely think the wound was early for me. And I also, I grew up, I have family in the deep South, in Louisiana and New Orleans, and that culture is even more exaggerated. And it was very clear from very early on that it was important what I looked like, and it was important what my brother did. So that was sort of the background. And then when I started going through puberty, totally in a normal biological way, it really felt frightening to me to be bigger. And I remember listening to a podcast you did before with a clinician who talked about her studies around perfectionism, the types of two different types of perfectionism. I don't remember what it was, but I had both. So I'm very perfectionistic, and I'm also just a very driven, there's that powerful part of me, that genius part of me, right? So I took, okay, this doesn't feel good. This isn't getting positive reinforcement, and I'm going to fix this, because I had the sort of drive to do that and had the sensitivity. I'm very sensitive, very intuitive, always have been, which then felt like a weakness. Now feels like an incredible strength because I'm a therapist. But I was really able to read people and deliver what they wanted from me. And that felt like getting smaller. So I started restricting food. I started exercising. I was a cross-country runner. I started exercising, adding workouts to my practice even. And frankly, I got a lot of positive reinforcement. I got, envy. I got, even from family, people noticing that I lost weight, that I was so disciplined. And definitely from my peers who, we would go to cross country practice and everybody was talking about how to not eat until dinner.
Oh my God.
And I just did that. Do you know what I mean? I was just excellent at what we were all talking about, and nobody else was actually doing it. It felt like.
It's just so crazy to me and so powerful to recognize that, so many of these stories I've shared with other people on the podcast, so many of them go back to this idea of compliments and reinforcement for losing weight and changing your body in this really unhealthy way. And that drives so many of us to just keep doing it, we keep coming back to the thing that's being culturally reinforced and valued, of course,
Totally. And I was incredibly lucky in that I had I had plenty of resources around me. I got people, my teachers noticed, somebody noticed, I got taken care of, I got treatment, and was able to develop some other coping skills, but that's not available to everyone. And that's something that I find very upsetting. And for me, I continued to sort of walk in a world. You asked though what food was like.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely food was very culturally important for us growing up, because we had, we're French culturally, we're New Orleans, Creole, Southern, very important culturally to be, but also to be controlled and to like be compensated for, and to be, if you're going to indulge, to make sure that you're exercising, or if you're going to indulge in a French, a cream, something heavy, to compensate with something light next day. So it really was not a neutral, the way we related to food was certainly not neutral. There was a lot of commentary in my family about staying small, about watching diets, about being on a diet. And I think for me, that made it very easy to develop a full-blown eating disorder because it was so normal. And I struggled. I got treatment in high school. I went to Yale for college, and I love Yale. I loved Yale. It was also a very perfectionistic, high pressure environment. Relapsed in college and continued to struggle. But since I've moved to New York, I've made several career changes and am a therapist. And in that process, did my own recovery work and feel so steady and confident in that and passionate about the way that it's liberated me, that this is the work that I now do all the time, because I feel, for me, doing recovery work allowed me to see the world, like to see beauty, to see joy, to see connection, all of which I was really starved of for a long time.
Yeah, your world was probably very small when you were in the eating disorder.
Yes. So I am incredibly passionate about the work because of that.
Mm-hmm. I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
I totally feel that.
I hope I answered your question.
Oh my God, totally. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, there's so much there to sort of unpack and explore, because I'm interested in like, what was it in high school that helped spur you into treatment, when maybe your family didn't recognize, but someone at school did. And then when you were in college and relapsed, what happened then? And was there anyone to sort of catch you at that point and help you back into treatment? Or was your recovery path a lot harder from then on?
Both. And I was lucky. My teachers noticed in high school, I actually wrote a poem about like perfection. And my teacher, Mrs. Gergis, I'll never forget her. She asked me if I was doing okay. And I was like, yep, I'm fine. That was the first sign. And then eventually my mother did know, I think that I was very lucky. Like, she sort of had a vision of me in her head, and I looked so much smaller that it scared her. And then she started seeking help and took me to the pediatrician. And I think back then we really didn't have as much of an understanding of eating disorders. So the intervention was mostly medical. I think I did see a counselor, but I really just went for, weekly weigh-ins with the doctor, and it was all about weight stabilization. And I was quite motivated because what I wanted was what I was missing was to be taken care of. So I got all this attention, and I was like in it, right? So I kept my food diary. I ate what I was supposed to eat, and it was really hard. But again, like, my family was very supportive with that. It was difficult with friends. I mean, there was lots that was hard about it. It's not an easy thing, but I was incredibly fortunate to have a family that was like on board. I don't think that they were really giving me the education to know that I needed continuity of care in college, and like I really needed a long-term therapist, and I didn't have any nutrition support. Doctor did that. And so when I went to college, I just leaned on what I already had, right? Like the skills that had served me well, and nobody noticed. I eventually took it's like funny to think back on. I'm such a stereotype, but I was suffering so much that because I restricted in high school, I became bulimic in college. And that was much more what I would say as a therapist, ego dystonic. It did not fit with the narrative of perfection and like control, right? I felt very out of control. I felt very consumed by these behaviors. The behaviors are very addictive. It's hard to function without them. And I really wanted help. So I went to the head of student health at Yale. It was like, I have an eating disorder and I need help. And he gave me some names. So I got a therapist.
Good for you.
Thanks. And I did a group. And I actually kept my eating disorder a secret from the group. Just a big piece of bulimia is the secrecy, right? There was a lot of shame for me around that for a while, and then eventually disclosed and started my healing. And it was it was rocky. I had a therapist who I didn't really connect with in college. And, I had a boyfriend who knew, but didn't really know how to help me. And then when I moved to New York, I got a lucky referral, honestly, and found a therapist who is excellent and has been treating eating disorders for 25 years and knows exactly what she's doing and had the training to work with me. And that relationship has been incredibly healing for me, because I don't think that most clinicians, unfortunately, really get the training.
I totally agree.
And there's so much misinformation about how to work with food, and so much really triggering information and advice in the health industry that really proliferates disordered thinking and eating. And something that I'm very passionate about now, I was very sick at one point, but I see disorder all around me, even people who are functioning quite highly, but suffering in their relationship with food and their body, because that's what's normal.
Exactly.
That, to me, I sort of on a meta level, like, always think about, what if we were to release that energy, right? Like, how powerful would we collectively be as women or as marginalized bodies?
Yes, I completely agree, because I think it's, I've said so many times on the podcast before, like, this idea from the beauty myth really sort of resonates so much with that, because we really are giving up our energy and power to something that, if we didn't do that and didn't have something else that took its place, we could be so much more powerful and so much more rooted in our power as women and marginalized people, for sure. And, this constant pursuit of impossible thinness and perfect, quote unquote, clean eating and, morally superior. I mean, now it's taken this, like, such a twisted path, I feel, in terms of
wholeness, muscle tone.
Right. Ugh. Yeah. And like ancestral leanness is like a thing that I've heard bandied about. I was like, what the hell are you even saying? Like, that's, I can't.
I don't even know what that means. Yeah. No, I had a conversation with a dear friend of mine the other day, who I hope I'm not going to out her, but I hope she doesn't know that I'm using this. I don't think she would, about sort of softness, like that she's a mother and she has a lot of body privilege, as do I, which is, part of why I was sort of able to get away with my eating disorder, is that everyone's like, oh, you're thin, you're fine, right? When in fact I was incredibly sick. But she, has had a skinny body her whole life, and now she's a mother, and she looks beautiful, but she doesn't have like the same body she did before she was a mother. And I just was talking to her, mothers are supposed to be soft. Women are supposed to be soft,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
We are supposed to be warm and soft and nurturing and nourish, or, mothers, not all women want to be mothers, but like,
right.
There's a beauty in that. There's like life and creation in that.
And without that softness too, like without, adequate fat on our bodies, we literally would not have the capacity to produce life in that way.
Or to lactate, or, yeah. So this is a person who's a beautiful mother, just really a special mother, and really just was born to be a mom. And I just was sitting with her thinking, like, look how beautiful you are, and that is heartbreaking to me, that that's the world that we're in. And so I didn't even say at the beginning, I'm a psychotherapist, but I'm also a yoga instructor. And a lot of my negotiation of the yoga world has been trying to find a way to teach yoga, which has been an incredible part of my healing in terms of becoming connected to my body and accepting of my body and appreciative of my body, to recovery, because it's yoga and it's also exercise. And the way that we talk about exercise in our culture is quite triggering. And it's really all about lean muscles and getting a workout. And that's clearly, I don't think that all yoga teachers would reduce their practice to that. Like, I think that that's just the business piece, right?
Totally. But that's also, that language is definitely woven throughout yoga, and something that, I mean, I definitely was in that same boat of having yoga be a really powerful part of my journey and my healing from my eating disorder. But it also was super triggering sometimes, and I heard so many things in yoga classes that kind of put me into a tailspin. And it was just sort of this like passing phrase that someone would use. It wasn't the focus of the course of the class, but like something that someone would just say without thinking, really, was emblematic of this whole diet culture that we live in, and this instrumental view of exercise and food.
Yes.
That, it was like you just could fall down this rabbit hole with that stuff, and the person saying it might not even realize what they were saying.
Right, because it's so normalized. I mean, the idea of getting toned, staying lean, getting a bikini body, all of those things are such normal parts of our lexicon, but can do so much damage. And that's, it just blows my mind. Like, I think that most people who come to yoga teaching come to it with really beautiful intentions, because they've experienced the transformation of doing this practice. So I'm actually I recently went to a conference at Kripalu on in the world, it's the only annual symposium on yoga research, which kind of blows me away.
Yeah. You'd think there would be more at this point.
You would think, right? But no. And there were some other eating disorder clinicians there. And so we're doing some work toward developing standards for teaching yoga, because yoga is an incredible intervention working with eating and body image issues, and it's particularly helpful for various reasons. But the language that we use is very important. So
absolutely,
we're working to try to develop some standards around language for, best practices for yoga with eating disorders. But my biased, I guess you could say, view is that those standards should really be the standards for all yoga, because there's no reason that someone needs to feel judged in yoga class or feeling like you're not enough because you can't do an advanced posture, or feeling like you're doing the breath work wrong, or like there's no one else of your body shape in the room or your skin color in the room. Like, those things are not yoga.
No, exactly. I totally agree. And I think, it's just important that we all sort of alter our view of exercise from this instrumental practice that fits in seamlessly with diet culture, and for which the marketing is exactly the same, as like to make you feel a sense of lack and shame about your body and then buy something to fix it,
Right.
Like, we can't, especially with yoga, that is so antithetical to the actual practice. And I think people don't realize that they're marketing in that way, or that they're infusing their classes with that kind of language. But, I think it would be really powerful to start a movement that addresses that.
Yeah. Well, as soon as I develop the ability to work 24 hours a day and not eat.
Oh my God, I know.
I'm on it.
Oh, I know.
I'll get there someday, I hope.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure there are people listening to this who would jump on board with that too. And I know I've, talked to a few people like Anna Guest-Jelly of Curvy Yoga, or there's, Jessamine Stanley I would love to have on the podcast at some point. And
I love Jess. I did a workshop with Jessamine back. So I used to teach these outdoor body positive yoga classes when I had access to a space, which I know access to. And Jessamine and Dana Seti came and did a workshop. They're doing such groundbreaking work. Like, anybody listening should definitely check them out.
Yeah, they have this amazing Cody app now that I think is really fantastic.
And there actually is an online training for yoga teachers called Yoga for All, which I am embarrassed to say I started and didn't complete because I simply had too much on my plate, and I hope that I can go back and complete it. But it's run by, and we'll link to it, it's run by Diane, I can't remember her name because I put myself on the spot.
Diane Bondi?
Diane Bondi, and the woman who runs Amber Carnes Body Positive Yoga in Virginia. Yeah, so the website is yogaforalltraining.com, and you can log in, and they are two women in larger bodies who've been teaching yoga for a long time, who teach you how to work with people of diverse shapes, sizes, and levels of ability. So if you're a teacher who's interested, until I start my revolution, if you're interested in learning that, it is there. It's online, yogaforalltraining.com. And I fully recommend. They're great.
That's fabulous. Thank you.
They have, sure. And they really have a grasp of like the cultural dynamics and the theory under, they get it.
That's so important. Because I think yoga can be so healing, but in sort of the wrong hands or if you stumble into the wrong class, it can really turn you off of it. And I think that's not how all yoga is.
It's not. And a lot of my work, I do individual psychotherapy. I also do individual yoga therapy, often as an adjunct to psychotherapy. So I'll work with a therapist with somebody. And a big challenge is navigating the yoga community and helping people deal with the triggers that they're going to encounter inevitably.
Yeah, because I've found that people in the yoga community have all these thoughts about food that are not actually rooted in science or reality, that are just sort of along for the ride in this kind of body negative way of approaching yoga.
Yeah, and I'm sure you know more about that than I do, even about the food part.
Yeah, that was a particular trigger for me too in my early recovery when I was doing yoga, because I stumbled into some classes with yoga teachers who are vegan and very stridently vegan. And, veganism can be a great ethical choice for people if it's done in a way that, prioritizes your own self-care and doesn't include a lot of other restrictions. Because I think people can eat anything they want and eat intuitively and be vegan if they're approaching it in an intuitive and body positive and self-care way. But I think it can easily get twisted into, and I've seen so many clients and, other people twist it into just an excuse to restrict and then pile on other restrictions on top of it and punish themselves through this thing that is supposed to be, if you are approaching it in that way, it can be actually very caring sort of philosophy. So, I think when you hear yoga teachers go off about veganism, I think don't attach too much credence to that, because I think some people who are talking about it in that way are doing it from a restrictive place or from, an unconscious sort of diet mentality place. I don't think they even necessarily realize that it's being approached in a way that is rooted in diet culture, but it is.
Yes. One of the most wise women and yoga teachers that I have ever encountered, Naveen Makan, she used to always say, she doesn't teach in Manhattan anymore, but she says, it's nobody's business what you eat.
Yeah,
do what you're going to do and don't be crazy about it. Which doesn't sound like something that our yoga, so simple, but you're fine. Just do what you're going to do and don't make yourself crazy about it. And
I love that.
Yeah,
it's a great quote.
Yeah, totally. And same with, I went to her once. This is my personal mantra. She's a genius when it comes to doing body, assessing bodies, and she does a lot of therapeutics.
Assessing in terms of
alignment, she's great with pain, and she's very skilled, right? So I went to her and I said, oh, this hurts, that hurts, fix my alignment. Tell me what's wrong with me. And she was like, there is nothing wrong with you. All you need to do is be a woman and sit on your golf ball. And which I'll explain is, she talks about pelvic alignment. Basically, she works with Taoist theory. So it's all about male, female, and your body fitting itself, and the pelvic alignment, a neutral pelvis, basically, you could sit with a golf ball in your perineum. So she literally was saying just align your pelvis and just be yourself, be in your power, and your body is you don't need to fix anything.
Yeah, that's so powerful, because I think we all do have these imbalances in our bodies or ways that things aren't aligned properly. And I remember going to physical therapy years ago when I was still in my eating disorder, because I was having a ton of pain in my knees and my lower back. And, the physical therapist giving me a lot of recommendations and saying, this is tight and that's tight and this whole left side is, kind of wonky or whatever. And I just felt so much shame and so much, stigma for my body, which was already stigmatized at the time, that I was doing to myself, because I was in my eating disorder, but it just was, I think, hearing yoga teachers down the line say like, look, we all have these imbalances. We all have ways in which our bodies are not perfectly aligned because we have sort of habits that we fall into over time, and that's normal, was very healing to me.
Yes. And that the mind cannot outsmart the body.
Mm-hmm. Mind over matter doesn't work.
No, you cannot like think through why this is tight and that's tight and that hurt. At some point you have to let your body do what it does very naturally, which is heal itself and survive. And if we can kind of get out of the way, the idea that we have to somehow facilitate that through some cleanse or some like magical yoga sequence or some, times a week that we exercise or clean foods that we eat, like the body has survived for a long time without any of that. And if we just get out of the way, and that's what I love about, the idea of intuitive eating really for me becomes intuitive movement, because the body will tell you when you need to move. It will tell you when you need to stretch. It will tell you when you need to strengthen. And we don't, unfortunately, have the luxury in this culture of only move. People have to work and they have to sit it down. There's a million variables, but I feel like if we were able to just trust a little bit more that like our bodies have got that part, there'd be less suffering.
I know. That is so beautifully said. And I mean, that's something that I have been incorporating more into my work with people recently, because it's really so amazing when you do like tune in and listen to what your body's asking for. And it can be as simple as, oh, I need to just like get up from my desk for 5 minutes and stretch or walk around the block or something. It's not this sort of punishing, hour-long commitment all at one time or whatever it is that people make movement out to be. Because when you think of it in that way, it sounds so exhausting sometimes. And if your body is not asking for that kind of movement, but you force it into that, it's very much the same thing as if your body is not asking for vegetables and really wants a cheeseburger, but you force it to eat vegetables,
Exactly. My yoga practice has been with me for a long time now, but the example I often give to clients is when I used to work on an inpatient psychiatric unit at Bellevue Hospital, and I was there during Hurricane Sandy. So we lost power in the hospital. We had to evacuate the hospital. Like there was no power, there was no water. We were literally going like walking up 18 flights of stairs every day to the units. And it was the end of days. There was the Coast Guard there with it literally felt like the apocalypse. And it was incredibly traumatic for me. And I had to stop. I used to watch The Walking Dead. I just really had a trauma response to this, as I think most people did and the whole system did. That's a whole nother conversation. But I was really working on having a personal yoga practice then. And I used to just really trying to roll out the mat every day and let go of what it was going to look like and really let go of what you needed to do and what, doing however many sun salutes or whatever. I swear for months, all I did was lay in Shavasana. And I sort of ground myself in trauma theory now, because Peter Levine, who developed something called somatic experiencing therapy, works a lot with shock trauma and really talks about how, like, when the body gets traumatized, it has to, like, animals will lay on the ground until the trauma processes through their bodies and then get up and shake it off. And because humans have this ability to reason, we just like fall off our bike and get right back up. But that has an impact on the whole system. So I always think of that as like my yoga mat being the place where I let that traumatic experience like integrate in my body. And like that was incredibly healing. Like I needed integration. I needed Shavasana. I did not need a handstand, right? And like that is my yoga practice. It goes with you where you need it to be. And it supports you where you're suffering. It's not a certain pose. It's not,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh my gosh. I haven't shared this on the podcast before, and now maybe is the time, or maybe I'll edit this out. So we'll see how I feel afterwards. But I was recently diagnosed with PTSD, and It happened, I got the diagnosis because I went to this eating disorders conference, the META conference, which is amazing, and all clinicians listening should definitely go, Multi-Services Eating Disorder Association. And there was a talk on eating disorders and PTSD. And Jenny Schaefer was one of the speakers. And she's a writer who's shared a lot about her own eating disorder recovery and been very forthcoming sort of about her experience. And she shared that she had PTSD for 10 years and didn't realize it because she was going through eating disorder recovery and because the eating disorder sort of was a coping skill, but then also she was doing all this other work that sort of took precedence. And she didn't realize that the trauma was there until her husband moved in with her to her house. And whenever he would like pop around a corner unexpectedly or like come out of nowhere, she would freak out and like startle. Sometimes she would sort of panic and curl into a ball. And this was just, it floored me because just a few months before that conference, my boyfriend had moved in with me and I had started to have some of the same responses to him. Like I would freak out if he would talk to me when I was in the shower, or if he would come up behind me and I wasn't expecting him, I would panic, you know? So I sought out a trauma therapist and she was like, yes, you definitely have PTSD, which was very reassuring and sort of validating in some ways because there had been all this stuff in my life, all this history of like, I'm afraid of balloons. I can't be around balloons because I'm afraid they're going to pop or explode. I can't be around fireworks and I'm afraid of loud noises. And, you know, if someone bursts into the subway car unexpectedly, I panic, you know, or I startle, have this very exaggerated startle response. And for so many years, I was like, you know, I'm just such an anxious person. First it was like, oh, what's wrong with me? I'm the worst. And then as I started to recover, you know, from my eating issues and do this sort of deeper work on self-compassion and healthier coping skills, it was like, okay, well, I'm an anxious person. Or then it became, okay, I'm a very sensitive person and I have these responses because of that. And there's still a little bit of a flavor of like, there's something wrong with me. You know, there's something wrong with me and I'm going to accept it, but there's something wrong with me. And I think that knowing that it was and starting to have this whole framework to put everything into where I'm like, oh, actually, my grandfather had PTSD from World War II. My dad had PTSD from Vietnam. Like it's genetic. It's, you know, there's this intergenerational transmission that can happen. All of these, you know, things that had happened in my life that sort of added up and that I didn't process and that I just moved on because that's how I was taught and that's how my dad did it. And, you know, definitely how my mom did it. And like, it was this whole other layer that I'm now uncovering in my relationship with my body that I think I never would have been able to uncover if I hadn't done the work around my relationship with food first. And I'm so grateful to this like community that I'm in of mental health professionals and eating disorder survivors who sort of led me to this idea. So I don't know. I just felt like sharing that because it really resonated with me, this idea.
No, I'm because I think that's sort of where for me, I don't know. I'm always trying to define my approach and it's forever changing. For me, like I've had a lot of experience working with trauma by chance in my training. I have really come to feel like we really all have trauma. And when you look at the world, like the bigger picture of the world and the amount of suffering in the world, the conflicts between policemen and citizens right now, like the PTSD or trauma theory frame for looking at symptoms is so depathologizing, and it helps me sort of be in the world, but also work with people and explain to them that like, this is actually like this symptom you're having or this thing you're doing is like your body's super normal response to something bad happening, right? Like when you think about where I began this conversation, and I'm trying to put too many things together, which, you know, maybe one day I'll write a book, but when we started with like how we experience femininity, how we experience ourselves in the world, and the way that we look at eating disorders, you know, we're all responding to our environment. And that's not to say that we have no control over ourselves, But one of my supervisors always said, like, an eating disorder is a totally sane response to insane circumstances. And I see PTSD the same way. Like, it's like your body is trying to survive in circumstances that are messed up in some way, or scary, or frightening, or devaluing, or confusing, or, and that really helps me work with people. There's a great, maybe you should read it too. There's Peter Levine's book. He sort of talks about the interaction between like a tiger and an impala. Maybe it's some other predator and an impala, and like what an animal that's being attacked does. And it really helps me sort of understand the nervous system.
Yeah, because there's this sort of nervous system fight or flight response that happens, right?
Right. Fight, flight, or freeze.
Or freeze, yeah. And I think it's very sort of enlightening and humbling in a way to experience this in myself and to be able to see, like, for me, the massive anxiety around food that I had when I was in my eating disorder was just one manifestation, and actually sort of in the context of my life, maybe a relatively short one, because I had had these other, sort of major startle responses, or just like a habit of dissociating mentally and sort of taking myself out of a situation that had been present for much longer since, childhood.
Yeah. Eating disorder symptoms are great for that.
Oh, yeah. It really fit right into that. And it gave me sort of a better window into understanding, like, for the people whose eating disorders develop really early, it's exactly that. It's a coping skill that really helps you numb out and dissociate from something that is too big and too scary to let yourself feel all the time, and as a child, especially, like, there are these things that happen in the world and in families that are just horrifying sometimes. And so I definitely have worked with a number of clients whose eating disorders started really young, and they just stumbled into it because they found that when they restrict their food, or when they binge, or when they think a lot about calories, or when they binge and purge, those overwhelming feelings go away and helps calm the anxiety. And I think we just have to really recognize, to anyone who is struggling with an eating disorder and feeling like these symptoms really suck and I want to get rid of them and I have to stop doing this, it's important to remember that it did actually function for you at some point in your life. And it might have been, in a very real way, the only coping mechanism you had, you know? And so, like, to maybe have a little bit of gratitude for it, as well as thinking, yes, it's not serving me anymore and I need to stop this to, preserve my health for sure. But, like, just take a moment to realize, you're not crazy for having done this. Like, this was actually a viable solution at one point in your life.
Absolutely. And I think it blows people's minds still, but I always say to people, like, you've got to have permission to have your symptom until we develop other skills.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we can't just take your crutches away and expect you to walk.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's really challenging for some people maybe in the eating disorder field to navigate that, because I know that, like, in a treatment center, for example, you have to just strip away someone's coping skill completely. And there's certainly moments when that's important, but I think it's, for the larger trajectory of someone's recovery, it's really impossible to just give up the disordered behaviors and expect yourself to be okay without doing that deeper work to figure out what are some coping skills that actually truly resonate and truly deal with the emotion that's happening.
Wow. Well, I feel like we've covered everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Too much all at once. I was thinking while you were talking recently or a few minutes ago, like, how great you are at, like, concretizing things and, like, saying things simply. And I just tend to sort of fly off into the ether and, like, get really abstract.
Oh no, I love how you put things. I feel like you have such a beautiful way of sort of synthesizing and tying things together. I think that's so valuable in this world, because I think there are so few. I mean, we're in this bubble, right? I feel like I have so many friends and colleagues who are professionals treating eating disorders or activists in the body positive movement, and my listeners are, coming along with me for that journey and getting steeped in that too. But, like, in the larger world, we're such a drop in the bucket still. We're a small community, and we need, like, all these different voices and all these different ways of understanding things and synthesizing. I think the feminist thinking or the deeper, the theory around trauma or the practical application of like how to speak about bodies in a yoga class, and like all of that I think is so important for moving forward in this body positive movement that we're all in. So I think your voice is so needed and so powerful.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm curious, I mean, I have so many other questions for you. I want to know like all these things about, how you got into, I guess, maybe that's something we can end on is like, what was your journey sort of out of the eating disorder and into body positivity and health at every size and size acceptance in like 5 minutes?
The elevator speech.
Elevator pitch, yeah.
So I was in a career that I didn't like, that certainly fit with my eating disorder, but not with my actual self-actualized self. And so during my treatment, I left that career. I was in an investment bank. I was in financial services at an investment bank and then an asset management company, and was also very lucky to have really wonderful mentors in that field who supported me in my transition, just something that felt more like me. And I quit. I literally like up and quit my job. Saved
Just
money.
Couldn't have it. Couldn't take it anymore.
Going and decided I wanted to be a therapist. And after much self-examination, but then I quit. Like I didn't get my bonus for that year. Like there are things I could have done that would have been like made more sense to my parents. You know what I mean? And I was just like, I am done. And I had started to practice yoga. And I had the good sense to like put that do a teacher training for myself, just to have like structure and community during this time that I took off, where I was going to be volunteering and like making sure that I actually wanted to be a social worker. So I did that. I did my teacher training with no intention to teach. And then I went to social work school and really did a lot of general behavioral health because I knew I was interested in eating disorders, but I wanted to make sure I came to that with some general experience and made a choice about it rather than just defaulting to that because of my own experience. And continued to I had supervisors and my therapist who come from a feminist psychoanalytic background, and the Women's Therapy Center Institute is where I ended up doing my postgraduate clinical training. And, they have been integrating feminism and psychoanalysis since the 70s and talking about intuitive eating and body acceptance for much longer than it was popular. So I really grew up in my training with that frame of understanding how bodies are impacted by culture, how we interject culture, how we take in our culture and develop symptoms to cope with it, whether it's misogyny, racism, gender-based, any element of our identity that is marginalized and oppressed shapes our relationship to our body, right? So really just over time have, through my own experience and through my studies, become so interested in embodiment and was really pulled to integrate the yoga piece. At the beginning, I was just like, I'm not a yoga teacher. Everybody stop asking me to teach yoga. I'm not going to lead mindfulness-based groups for the clinicians in graduate school. Like, what are you talking about? And then eventually I want to be a psychoanalyst. That's what I knew. And it eventually sort of came into something that's not what I was taught, but what I am and do. And that's pretty integrative. And health at every size was just part of my clinical training, right? Understanding the history of the body ideal and the way that capitalism commoditizes our bodies. Am I making sense?
Oh my God, completely. I've gotten a criticism on the podcast that like the thing that I hear the most people say they don't like about it is that I say, mm-hmm, and yes, and totally, and oh my God, yeah, I totally agree, like all the time. So I'm trying to be a little more silent in my responses, but just know that I'm nodding vigorously and fully on board with you. Yeah.
Well, just hoping I'm getting my it's so much to say in 5 minutes, as you said.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's really, I think for me in my own recovery, doing work around body image, of course, is the thing in the eating disorder field that is hardest to treat, takes the longest to work with. And my perspective on that is because it's a psychodynamic issue. It's something that we are taught from a very early age from our culture and our families that, we either have an acceptable body and have to keep it that way, or we don't have an acceptable body and have to still try to figure out how to live in the world and be happy, and may experience trauma or bullying because we don't have an acceptable body. And
Yeah. I think, something that's interesting too about that is that clinicians say body image work is the hardest thing to do or the last step of recovery, which it really is for most people.
Mhm.
But I've definitely heard a lot of clinicians say like, oh, the body image work, she needs to do the body image work. We got to figure out how to do the body image work. And nobody wants to do the body image work, really.
And for anybody to do the body image work, we all have to do the body image work. And the clinicians
exactly.
have to be doing the body image work because we are all a function of the same culture.
Exactly. Yeah, which makes it so hard for clinicians to do that work if they themselves don't understand their own relationship with their bodies or understand the principles of health at every size and why it's so important to be accepting of all bodies, whatever their size. It's a larger issue in the field, I think.
Mm-hmm. And in the world.
And in the culture at large. Yeah, exactly.
Which is why I've been trying to do some workshops recently. You came to one, which is a Yoga for Better Body Image workshop, which I'm thinking I will probably expand into more of a program next year sometime.
That's wonderful. I would get on board with that for anyone who's
Thank
listening.
you.
Like, get on it because it's wonderful.
And then, I'm also really interested in doing work for clinicians, and that's been harder to sell a little bit. I think that all of us caretakers struggle to take care of to make time to take care of ourselves. And I relate to that, but I definitely want to do some of that work as well. So stay tuned.
Oh, I love it. I think clinicians really do need to do this work, and anything you can do to improve your relationship with your body and accept your body more is going to translate into what you model for clients and how you talk about weight and size, and I think it's so important to feel okay or, at least accepting of your own body to be able to do this work with other people, which, I'm a recovered person doing this work and I'm all for recovered people doing this work. But I feel like, at some level, maybe it is a disservice to have clinicians who are recovered but don't really fully accept their bodies or haven't done at least sort of done the work to understand academically the principles of health at every size and why that's so essential to treating eating disorders. It's a disservice to people, I think. So anyone who works with eating disorders and really any health professional in general should really be steeped in that information, if nothing else.
Right, because the people who are most vulnerable to eating and body image problems are oftentimes the most sensitive. And if you're working with a nutritionist who's not neutral about food, you're going to feel it. And if you're working with a therapist or a yoga instructor who's not neutral about their body, you're going to feel that too.
Exactly. You'll pick it up. It's in those tiny little words and moments and choices about how people, explain what's going on with your weight or, whatever it is. So yeah, I think it's such great work you're doing. And I'm so, so grateful to you for sharing your story because it's very powerful.
Thank you. I hope so.
Where can people find you and learn more about your workshops and also just your practice in general?
Sure. So I'm in a never-ending existential crisis of whether I'm a therapist or a yoga teacher or both, and how I won't go into that. But
I feel you.
I have two websites. One is Lauren. My name is Lauren Minear. I was recently married, but my website is my maiden name, Lauren Ezell Therapy. EZELL therapy.com. And then I also have a site called InBodied Yoga, INBODIED, which is sort of my idea of yoga or the practice that I try to embody and teach. And those two sites link to each other. So if you find one, you can find the other.
I love them. They're such great resources.
Oh, thank you. And I have a private practice in downtown Manhattan, in the financial district. So I do psychotherapy and yoga therapy there. And I am always putting together workshops and things. So you can actually subscribe on my websites, and then you'll be in the loop and get announcements for any workshops that are upcoming.
Fantastic. I will include those links in the show notes so everybody can subscribe.
Perfect.
Yeah, definitely get on those lists. Anyone who's listening. Well, thank you so much, Lauren. It's really been a pleasure talking with you.
Likewise, I've enjoyed it so much.
So that's our show. Thanks again so much to our guests for being here and to you guys for listening. And we'll be back again next week with another brand new episode. Meanwhile, I'd love to stay in touch. And the best way to do that is via email. So you can go to christyharrison.com/email to sign up for my VIP list. I'll send you info about new episodes of the podcast as they drop, as well as exclusive sneak previews of new episodes, exclusive giveaways and other special deals on the products and services I offer, special tips on how to make peace with food and learn to trust your body, and a whole lot more. Sign up at christyharrison.com/email. You can also subscribe via iTunes and leave us a nice rating and review, which is a great way to get the word out about the podcast and help other people find these important messages. Just go to iTunes from your computer or your podcasts app, type in Food Psych to the search bar, click on the result that comes up under podcasts, and then click on ratings and reviews, and you can leave a rating and review right there. And I really appreciate all the 5-star reviews and wonderful ratings that we've gotten because it's helped us climb really high right now in the rankings. So we're currently in the top 50 of all health podcasts, and that's really cool because we're competing against some of the diet mentality, sort of traditional weight management and body shaming types of messages that I'm trying to fight with this podcast. So we've really started to beat out a lot of the diety voices, and I'd love to continue climbing higher in the rankings to get this message out even further. So please leave us a nice rating and review. It's so very much appreciated. And thanks to everyone who's left reviews so far. The music you're hearing behind me now is by a band called AWOL, and the track is called Food, used under the Creative Commons license. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, stay psyched.
Stupid or scared, no work in the kitchen now. Who put you there in that perfect position now? Bullies want your food, and you ain't really beat. Have you ever went over your friend's house to eat?